the rate of innovation in the fintech ecosystem or in the financial services ecosystem is going to be much larger. And it's perhaps the only industry that touches every other industry. If you think about it, agriculture in one way might not affect a very varied industry of IT services, right? In a very dramatic fashion. But finance or financial services innovation will impact almost every industry along the way, from agriculture to chemical companies to manufacturing to even technology companies in the future, right? And the fact that finance always made the highest paychecks and technology was the second, you combine the two, you're still at the highest of the paycheck, or the Maslow's order of what is the highest salary. It's at the prime of context, and it will always be in the limelight.
Fintech and entrepreneurship are the careers up for discussion on today's podcast. Our guest today has graduated from the famous St. Xavier's College in Mumbai with a bachelor's in economics and statistics. His experience spans across several fields, such as financial services when he was working at Tala and RBL Bank, to venture capital investing in technology. He's also a regular guest on Tanmay Bhatt's famous show called Clueless, where he has honest conversations about money and savings. In today's episode, our guest talks about his experiences and his tips and tricks for all you entrepreneurs out there. It is my pleasure to introduce Gaurang Sanghvi, popularly known as Ask That Finance Guy across all social media platforms, on today's podcast and discuss with him the journey of his job. You are listening to The Career Show, a podcast that helps you find the right career and inspires you to follow your passion. My name is Trishank and I'm a student seeking answers to career-based questions that we all have. I'm here to sit down with career specialists and talk to them about the lessons learned during the journey of their career. Hi Gaurang, also known as Ask That Finance Guy. So happy to have you. Thank you so much for coming onto the show.
Hey, thank you. Great pleasure of mine to be here as well.
So I know we're going to be talking about fintech today, like I mentioned in my introduction. And fintech is such an umbrella term because fintech for me could be something completely different. And it's being used so frequently out there these days. I just wanted to understand, what is fintech for you?
So, surprisingly, fintech now, the new terminology is become tech fin now, right? Traditionally, finance tried to adopt technology, and that was the version one of it, right? And it's not new, right? Perhaps finance is the only industry or one of the first few industries to adapt technology, right? Credit card has been around for, remember the diners days from the 1930s to now, right? Credit card, ATM machines, whatever we do, right? Today we've shifted from physical cash to checkbooks a long back ago, right? Checkbooks was using a technology of using physical checks, but there was a central database of where checks were getting transacted from, to now where we're moving to a completely digital to even mobile based payments, right?
Correct.
And this is an evolution that's happened. So, which has been finance first, technology and innovation. I think what we're sitting today in is tech first financial uh, innovation, right? Which has not happened at least in the recent time. I think perhaps the large scale example is UPI, right? In
Correct.
India, wallets have not really built the case for adaptation, right? Even if all of us had wallets, we never used it to the same means. Perhaps UPI is the first time we are truly using a technology to transform an industry, right? Right?
Correct.
Traditionally, think about it. Originally, banks or financial institutions could only send money to each other. Now you can use a startup app to another startup app, right? Sending money from one bank to another bank, right? So it's
It's true.
gone to a very different world, and we're sitting in a tech fin world, which is very different to the first version of so-called fintech that we know, which is driving technology based on what financial outcomes you wanted.
You just mentioned that the new term has become tech fin, right? And I think one of the main concerns for a lot of students is getting that tech skill or tech into their finance idea. I faced this problem myself a couple of months ago. I'm sure a lot of other students face this problem as well. So, what advice can you give someone who has this business idea for tech fin and fintech? But how do they find the right skill or the right person to build their platform?
So I think the biggest mistakes people who have aspirations to start a fintech company, or people who think that it's easy, it's not, right? you have to have a technology understanding, so you don't need to know to how to code, right? You don't have to, but you have to understand how technology trends are changing. Also, you need to understand how tech stacks are built, right? So how tech companies are created, what are the organizational challenges that one needs to build, and how to go about it, right? It's not as simple as saying, I'll find a great tech co-founder and I will build this amazing company. Reality is that you will not be able to translate your ideas into action purely because you don't have that understanding. So anybody in has aspirations to be in this whole fintech or tech fin space or be in financial services in general, my recommendation is go learn how technology is built, right? How products are built. Spend a year learning about different product industries which have nothing to do with finance, right? Understand truly how did Uber go about building its product stack? What were the technologies it used? Why were they used at one point of time? Because all of those have to get applied to you. And if you don't have understanding, you would never truly will be able to co-partner with somebody to build, right? It's a misnomer that just because I studied finance in my undergrad or postgrad, I understand anything. I can guarantee you, you've learned the contrarian skills, right? You've learned skills that you actually cannot apply, right? So let's say if a CFA has learned about the different, they think that they can apply that to investing. It's not as easy because now you'll have to build algorithms, you'll have to build databases, you'll have to build automation, right? Which is what the leverage is versus saying, I have a great investment idea, but I know how to go about risk management. Actually, if you know how to do about risk management, you can be barely employed in my view, but that's nothing more than that. So there are enough courses online on Coursera on product management. So I think I'd suggest to broaden your horizon versus narrowing it to a particular finance subdomain.
Like you mentioned, one way to learn about these skills required in the fintech field is by going online and studying on websites such as Coursera. But another way I feel that people can also learn is by working at fintech companies. When one thinks about fintech, students and graduates usually think about starting their own firm and being an entrepreneur when it comes to fintech. But there are fintech companies out there currently, such as Paytm in India and various other payment banks across the world. So, do you think it is more beneficial to work at a fintech company first compared to starting your own company?
Starting and forget fintech, right? You have to have a deep problem that you're completely and truly passionate to solve. And you will go that extra mile or as many miles as needed before you can, call yourself not just successful, but to call yourself saying, I have reached a point of learning that I can reapply to that context, right? So you have to simply understand that we're not sitting in a world where anybody who gets out of college can make it. You have to have a truly a deep reason to solve it. And if you have it, time does not matter, right? Experience will be created if you're inquisitive about something, right? So I think the question to ask is there a problem that you want to deeply solve for? Or do you associate with somebody else who's solving that? Because if you don't have that inquisitiveness and the context to learn, you can go join as many Paytm companies around the world. You would pretty much end up doing that one Excel sheet or one PowerPoint presentation, but you would not move the needle for the firm, right? You have to get very, very focused at the same time, get very, very inquisitive to build product solutions out.
Let's switch gears and let's talk about Bachat Messenger, the fintech initiative you started in 2016. It was a short venture, but I'm sure it was one of your biggest learning experiences. Do you want to talk about how you started the company? What is the problem that you were trying to solve? How was the entire experience for you?
No, absolutely. I think it's one of the highest learnings that I've had. It was a very brief stint. So I used to be with RBL Bank before that. And obviously anyone who worked in a banking context realized that the constraints that you have to work in a banking setup is very, very large. I wanted to unwind those constraints while I used to actually sit out of their office in Gurgaon to start this, right? And what we were trying to do is build a better messaging system, which so basically it was a communication system which allowed payments by default, and it was focused on your financial products, right? So one of the first products that we wanted to launch was a credit card, which is an alternate credit card, right? Which is to the users. And in that journey, we basically built a chat journey where you now are able to talk to your credit card company in a very seamless manner, right? Around the same. And this is with allowing you to do payments along the journey, right? So if you can have a conversation, you wanted this thing, your card file is already on the chat. You do one click and the payment happens instantaneously, right? because it's in the same domain space. Now, the mistake that we did is that we tried to do too much too fast. The product was ready, the basic premise was ready, but I think we burnt ourselves too soon. And one of the biggest learnings that happened was that you have to go solve micro problems to solve the larger problem at hand, right? So the larger problem that we are trying to solve is how do you build a more intuitive messaging or more intuitive application for financial services that are simple for the user and are included in one application, right? Perhaps the problem that we should have solved for is micro solutions, which is making credit available at one click, then moving on to other pieces that you bring along the chain, right? Versus, so I think one of the biggest learnings is solve micro problems with a larger vision on it versus going to solve the very difficult, very large problems and forgetting about it. Look at it, right? Paytm. The first few cases in Paytm were very simple use cases, right? Telcos recharge was the reason to exist at Paytm early on, right? Saying simplest way to recharge. Then slowly they started adding, utilities, saying simplest way to pay your electricity bill, your water bill, your gas bill, and so on and so forth, right? And it kept on going from there.
Small steps.
Right. So I think perhaps the best learning should be that go solve the smaller problems, don't go after the larger.
Mm-hmm. I think the idea was fantastic because I think WhatsApp Pay is coming up right now, which is a similar way where you can pay people through the chat. So
actually, we stopped the day WhatsApp in 2017 Feb, if I remember. WhatsApp announced that doing payments, which is back then not like even imagined. Honestly, back then you couldn't imagine how Google Pay will become so big, or it was not even in the conversation that Google will launch a payment system in India, right? Especially which is a like Google globally is a closed wallet, right? It remains in like Apple Pay is a closed ecosystem where only Apple users can pay and you can't have third party users doing it, right? So no one expected Google to go build a open platform or even WhatsApp. And the day WhatsApp announced it, we realized it doesn't have a long tail for it. Perhaps we should have this thing because they've still technically not launched in the sense it's launched, but it's only for a few million users. Perhaps we had the last 3 years to build it out. So in hindsight, I wish that we'd continued the same stream of building the product solution.
No, I see why you stopped because I completely relate to that. And the reason I say that is because at the start of the year, I tried finding my own fintech initiative, which was an idea to facilitate foreign exchanges without any extra charges. However, 2 months into the project, we realized that Neo Global, company in India, was doing exactly the same thing. And they recently had a partnership with a big bank in India, which told us that it was time that we stopped the idea since we already had a very big competitor in it and who was already ahead of the game. So, yes, I definitely relate to you. But now let's talk about DSP Mutual Fund, the company where you work at and you're the digital head. When I looked at your LinkedIn, I was not aware of what exactly you were doing. So, do you want to talk about what you exactly do as the digital head of DSP Mutual Funds?
No, so think of us, right? So what we manage right now, we are the digital business where we look after the digital assets. So we're like a single product e-commerce company, if that is, or a single brand e-commerce company, right? So for example, if you were looking to buy a particular product of Samsung online, you could have gone to a Flipkart, Amazon, or the Samsung.com, right? Now, these are options that are available for the user, right? For the one who clearly know that they want to buy a Samsung product, similar to this, in mutual fund, you have 44 different brands. So we are the online commerce platform for individuals, for advisors, or corporates, right? Who want to come and transact in it. And that's what we manage altogether, which is called dspin.com, with our simple objective that we actually want to become a responsible investment platform, right? So if you look at what our competition looks like, obviously the few large bank mutual funds or AMCs as they are called, like ICICI Prudential, HDFC Mutual Fund, or SBI Mutual Fund, right? These are our direct competition online, but we also are competing within different platform players, right? Who aggregate all your investments across mutual fund categories. Now, the question is, why do users come to us? Is because we're truly trying to build a very unique experience for all the three segments, right? Investors, advisors, or corporates to solve their very basic needs of risk planning, goal based investment, or how do you do long tail investment and not get deterred with market volatility, right? So I think that's what we are. We're a single brand mutual fund company, if that's the simplest way to understand, right? A single e-commerce, single brand e-commerce in the mutual fund segment.
So you just spoke about ICICI Prudential, HDFC banks, which are really big banks in India. However, your customers still choose you guys over these big banks. A trend that I believe is that big investment banks such as Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs are relatively slower in the fintech game compared to the rising startups. So, do you agree with me? And what are your thoughts on this?
No, I actually, slightly disagree, right? I think Goldman's, like these great names that you invest, they actually invest heavily on technology. The reason is that we are not their customers, because typically Goldman Sachs is not going to come in service, or Merrill Lynch is not going to come in service doing me, right? Globally, that market set is too small. We don't have the capital that this thing. They're using a lot of technology on algorithm trading, on building their unique sets on portfolio management of large capital bases, right? And they invest very heavily and very consistently on this space. The context for investment banking, which is a different arm of most of these platforms, has no rationality for a large technology, because it's a brokerage business, right? It's basically finding buyers and sellers and trying to combine them in a single place around the same, right? So if you're trying to combine investors in for a particular transaction, could be an IPO transaction or could be any form of capital raising, you actually don't need so much technology to make that match happen, right? It's not like a banking industry that I'm trying to combine people who want to deposit money to people who I want to lend money to. That's a different operation altogether. But I think these players are heavily invested in technology on the back end, or on the what goes behind the scene, right? And over time, you will see it, right? If you look at it, Goldman Sachs partnering with Apple to build the Apple credit card, right? Or different forms of investment that they're making now in the front line of lending, on especially in the SME or SMB lending, as they say, it's going to be very different. And I don't think we're sitting in a world with options. You have to understand which one of the careers are ideal for you, right? What you're going to do in a Goldman Sachs, it does not matter, because it matters on what context of job profile that you use, and more importantly, who's your boss. I think most people go by brands and very rarely take the time to actually do the due diligence of your person that you're going to report with, people you're going to work with, your stakeholders, right? Today, everything is available online. You can ask a few questions and get to know 5 names that you're going to work with. It's like the best question to ask, as when they think, who are the 5 people that I'm going to be working with directly and indirectly, and what are the things that they are looking for in terms of skill set that I can go and solve for. I think that's the question to ask. It really does not matter so much in what brand name of an organization you work for, right? If you work for great people doing great things, you'll eventually be successful.
So, like you mentioned, even these investment banks are heavily investing into technology. Why do you think everyone is running behind this fintech world? Why is everyone putting money into it?
See, the rate of innovation in the fintech ecosystem or in the financial services ecosystem is going to be much larger. And it's perhaps the only industry that touches every other industry. To think about it, agriculture in one way might not affect a very varied industry of IT services, right? In a very dramatic fashion. But finance or financial services innovation will impact almost every industry along the way, from agriculture to chemical companies to manufacturing to even technology companies in the future, right? So it's fintech is the only thing that can be cross section across this thing, right? And I think the realization on the speed of innovation is only increasing, and the fact that finance always made the highest paychecks and technology was the second, you combine the two, you're still at the highest of the paycheck, or the Maslow's order of what is the highest salary. It's at the prime of context, and it will always be in the limelight. And it's very sad that we have some of the smartest people in the world, or all of the smartest people in the world, have always focused their attention and time around banking, trading, securities, and beyond. And you don't have that many smart people looking at other industries as well. So it's where economies of human capital also work out in where the revenue return is, right? So if you look at it, the IITs, a few years back, the highest paid jobs at IIT Delhi, Mumbai, let's see, I remember 10 years back was Schlumberger, right? The oil company, right? You were then seconded to one of these oil rigs or at one of their regional offices to do some very interesting work. Look at the companies that gave the highest paycheck, right? But actually, there's an Australian company, which is actually a quant trading company, which gave a 1.5 or, in dollar terms, about $175,000 uh, startup, like first time jobs, right? So it's where the money goes is where the attention goes, and it's unfortunate, but I think people end up doing these things, and it's just human to follow that trend.
If so many people are already in this industry, so many people are going to enter this industry. Do you think the market is going to get saturated if it already is not?
No, I doubt it. I think the scale and the size and the so the complexity, the scale, and the speed at which the need of change is happening, right, across different verticals. I think it's going to be a very long time. We're going to sit at least the fintech boom for the next 15 to 20 years, or perhaps forever, because it's a constantly evolving ecosystem around the same, right? And this kind of innovation or the speed of innovation, we don't see it in all other industries, right? So look at it, right? We're right now in automotive after so many years shifting up from combustion to electric. And that transition is not going to happen overnight, right? Tesla got launched more than 15 years back, right? They're
Exactly.
still not even at the cusp of saying that we're in the electric revolution yet, right? There are so many other challenges on battery, on infrastructure, and so on and so forth. I think it will take another 15 years before that transition to electric is now we can say, hey, listen, now the whole electric industry is really, really serious. It's a direct competition or it's already beaten the combustion engine, right? Just think of the finance world. It's much, much faster, right? Paytm, which was the poster child of fintech, is no more, right? Today we talk about Google Pay, we talk about Phone Pay, we talk about Bharat Pay, we talk about multiple other applications that were not in the picture 4 to 5 years before. And that's the reality. Some of these names might not exist also 5 years later. We don't know what the context looks like. So
You said 5 years down the line, some of these companies might not exist. And we know this industry is rapidly booming, which means there are going to be challenges that are going to be coming up. What are some of the challenges that you think students, new graduates, early professionals should keep in mind and should accordingly move through the challenges, or how to move through these challenges?
see, the too large to fail also applies to startups, right? We talk about banks too large to fail. Look at it. Paytm is too large for the investors to saying, okay, I'm not going to give you another $1 billion since I've already given you four. I'm not going to give you another billion so that you can grow on your context, right? So it's not going to unlikely. So in finance, what happens is as you go beyond a matrix of survival or an investment threshold, you're not going to die. So I think that context should be remain very clearly. So we're not going to see a death of fintech. What I'm saying is the relevance of a particular fintech, right, can diminish or reduce, but that does not mean it eliminates itself. It does not become in the context of saying these are the next big drivers. My advice to most people is that don't get enamored by names again in the fintech space across the board. Go work with younger, more hungrier founders who perhaps have spent some more time in the industry. And it's okay to fail with them, but the potential upside, right? So think of it, right? If I join Paytm today, it's already at 16 billion valuation. My rationale to be with a fintech is to get the ESOP structures going for me. How much reality of that ESOP I'm going to actually truly be able to multiply and be actually a point of influence. So my suggestion is work with smaller tail but great founders, startups, than to work with very, very large companies, because these are all 5 to 10,000 employee companies now or more, and you can easily get lost there, right? So hopefully work with smaller but quality founders and learn multiple aspects in your early stages than get into one narrow subdomain, which you will then constantly only, it's like a step repeat process that you will do. You'll get bored likely in 6 months. You might stay on because you want to ensure that you have a good career path and so on and so forth, but the learning is capped till the time you're going to work with some managers or some individuals who are truly building something unique and exciting in their subdomain, right? So do your due diligence and don't go after brand names, because brand names typically don't take your career forward. Learning does.
Being the Ask That Finance Guy on Instagram or on social media platform, I'm sure a lot of people and students reach out to you, right? When you suggest people to find founders who are at an early stage, I'm sure you get this a lot, but one, how to find these founders and how to reach out to them. So as Ask That Finance Guy, if someone reaches out to you, what would you be looking for in them?
So it's not very hard. Like, I wish it was as easy as it today than before. I remember my first few jobs, I used to do cold calling for hours, right? I remember calling BCG, McKinsey, board line, literally the board line. And the way I would do it is I would hear about somebody's name somewhere, because LinkedIn was not so prevalent as it's today, right? Or forget LinkedIn, Twitter didn't exist the way it exists today. So the question that you have to ask yourself is that who do you want to reach out to? Because everybody's names and their email address logic, right? So if I get to know somebody's first name, second name, I would know what that email would look like. And I will do bcg.com, I'll do bcgindia.com, right? I'll try multiple permutations and send separate emails, right? Hoping that they will do the conversation. Most didn't turn out the way I would want to, but it got me into the habit of never figuring out that, right, there is no one difficult to reach out, right? The question that you have to ask yourself is that why should somebody respond to you, right? So when you're writing and reaching out to people in LinkedIn, be specific, be a little unique, right? Don't try to say, hey, I'm looking for a job, because honestly, I don't want to click on that message. I want to delete it before I even open it. Tell me something that is unique about you that makes sense. And the second thing that I'm going to do is, after reading a message, I'm going to go to your profile, right? What do you have to say to the universe? You have reached out to me through any of these, LinkedIn, Twitter, or Instagram. What do you have to say in the shortest, most crisp format that basically it's inquisitiveness that I need to respond to this guy, right? Or this person, right? If I don't do so, I am missing out on some conversation like that. So you have to ask that hard question, right? Luckily, most people are asking me about stock tips, about which fund to invest in, or even better, I have done this investment. Please validate if I'm right. I'm like, if you have done it, then why are you asking me for the first place, right? So that's a different context, but I think people should focus on understanding what you want to do and why do you want to do it. The why is more important than how you go about it also, honestly. I was simply saying you have to go build long-term relationships with people. And if you don't take relationships as transactional, so for example, you and me talking today, if I just treat this as a transactional relationship, it will die and it will have no meaning for you to enact. If we take a longer view to the world, that saying, hey, listen, this podcaster who's with me can become a really big podcaster tomorrow, or has something unique to say about it tomorrow. It could be interesting interactions, right? It's not about what give or take is, it's about give or take about learnings that we come along with, right? And if you have that objective, then you're fine. Sorry, you were saying something.
No, the funny story is I actually released a networking tip video yesterday on my channel. And the last point actually said, like, take care of your network, because it is so important to not reach out to them when you need something. It's important to constantly stay in touch.
Right? Do something that is unique and has relevance to it, right? So, for example, if you're talking to a co-founder, take the effort to figure out what is the day that they started up. And if that day is coming up, hey, listen, I just got to know you had finished 2 years doing your startup. What an interesting thing. I've been following you. Here is something that I have to say. That clearly creates interest, right? You figured something out that was not just as easy as asking your friend, right? You did some effort to get to me. And that's what counts eventually.
100% completely agree with you. Let's come back to fintech and let's talk about if a person or a new student gets an idea for a fintech, what should their step-by-step process be? What should be the first few things they should do as soon as they get this idea?
I think, everybody thinks if I had that one unique idea, that will change the world. Like if I had invented Uber, I would have this thing. The question is, they never tried to invent Uber. They tried to solve the problem of how do I get a limo outside my door and not have to talk to the driver, right? It's a very different. Like Airbnb didn't go out and solve the problem saying, how do I find a hotel room or how do I find this thing? They said people have couches in their thing. It's excess inventory. How do I help them make more money from that, right? Right? And give a unique cultural experience where I can get to meet a local versus just random some hotel lobbyist that I will speak to who will guide me around there. Right? They start with novel problems or novel ways to solving a problem. So I think perhaps the first step is understand deeply what problem that you're trying to solve and what are the stakes that it takes, right? What are the life journey of that problem? How does somebody go about it? What are the hurdles that you can now simplify? So any startup that exists has to solve three things. You have to do something better, you have to do something in a very different way, or you have to do it faster, right? So if you have built the better, faster search engine than Google today, then you have something to solve for. But if you haven't, then you're not truly solving something, right?
Mhm.
And I really think today's world, you pretty much solved. We're still solving first world problems, right?
Mhm.
Uh, how do I have this app that puts me to sleep? It's genuinely a first world problem. Nothing wrong with it, right? I'm not making a value judgment of first world or third world, whichever way. The idea is not to become a social activist and go solve something
Mhm.
in this thing. But I'm saying, why do you want to go solve that, right? And that clarity brings it. And then you have to go about understanding the stakes in that, the touch points of that problem. What is a unique way to go solve it, which is repeatable and sustainable? People don't talk about the last part, right? Saying it's great if people come back to the same platform, but what are they going to actually make it sustainable where it's economically viable for the platform or both sides of the marketplace, or depending on what the service that you're offering, right? And then eventually, what are the tools that it takes to go build it, right? And how long am I going to stick with this problem? How deep am I going to go? How many other problems adjacent to these, right? That I'm going to go try solving for, right? So, for example, Uber now is trying to solve a big problem for its drivers to provide them capital, to buy new cars, to provide them health benefits, right? Very odd, right? Uber might become a very interesting health benefit, or even look at it. You need to understand your moat, right? They keep on saying it. Everything in life is about building a moat. Even in relationships, you need a moat, right? So if you have a wife or a husband, you need a reason to exist with each other, right? And differentiating. Otherwise, you have so many more options in the world, right? So you have to have a reason to do something, and that has to be very crystal clear in your mind, right? So we are living in a world of FOMO and of swipes. So hopefully you don't get diverged from the larger goal of what you want to truly go solve for, because it's a problem that you didn't imagine, but it truly exists, and no one's solving it the way you're thinking of.
So that's a great plan to action. Let's talk about my final question for you. And it's one that I ask everyone. And it is, what is one advice you wish you had received when you were starting off your journey? I usually get that pause as well.
No, so because you're asking a very essential question, right? The
Mhm.
advice that I wish I got. Perhaps I think, and looking back in the few years that I've been working now, maybe not a lot, but a decade and a half is still a few in my view, is that you have to be patient with everything. And perhaps if I had learned it personally, I would have been less impatient in my startups, or the way I go build about relationships, or how I do my work, right? And it's truly a virtue, and it's very, very undervalued as a skill set, right? So hopefully people are just patient with their money, patient with relationships, uh, have the faith of doing things, right? We're sitting in a world where constantly things are changing, and there is a narrative that gets amplified. Does not matter the narrative of politics, the narrative of environment. There's a narrative that's constantly looming, and the only truly way to do it is to take a step back, to be patient. But patience does not mean inaction. I think a lot of people misunderstand it, right? You need to be as impatient of solving the problem while be patient to get the results for it, right? So I think that's perhaps the one advice that I wish I got early, and I would have started investing maybe way earlier than I did, and that could have had a considerable uh, improvement on the stress levels that I went through in the past, right? And perhaps I don't want to ever go through that kind of stress levels financially. Very rarely we speak about it. All our stress can start and end with finance around your personal money, right? If you can solve that, the rest of the world around us can be much nicer and easier and safer and better overall. Right? Most people don't talk about it. Get financial outcomes than to get chase goals that are unnecessary.
I think that's a completely different topic that is for another time. And I hope to bring you on again, and I hope we can talk about that. But I think it's a great note to end on, that it is super important to be patient to get those results. This has been an amazing and interesting episode because we did not only touch on fintech, we also touched on entrepreneurship and reaching out to people and the importance of reaching out to people. So it's been a very insightful episode. Thank you so much, Gaurang, also known as Ask That Finance Guy. It's been my pleasure to have you on the show, and thank you so much for sharing this with me.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That's lovely.
I hope you enjoyed this week's career discussion. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section. Also, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support means a lot.